Hello, kiddies. Welcome. Hello, Dr. Lorraine Adams. Thanks for joining us tonight. Hi, Dr. Berg. Welcome. So, before we begin tonight's webinar, there are a few agreements I would like us to go through. The first is be engaged and collaborative, be an active listener, be respectful. And one more thing, please, if you have any question, any suggestion, kindly put it in the chat box and I would read it out loud to the host, to the facilitator. And the purpose of our webinar series is to delve into topics that support leading and learning in future learner-centered communities. By participating in our webinar series, you will strengthen your capacity to be a leader and teacher in learner-centered communities. Again, learner strategies that you can easily apply in your context, expand your network to include a professional community of educators committed to powerful student-centered teaching and learning. Our mission at Ghana ASCD, we are an educator learning community committed to advancing collaborative capacity building and strategic partnership that accelerates learning for educators and students. We have free webinars, Saturday professional development series, consulting, EdExpress newsletter, which comes out once every month, renewed journal, our Unlock Literacy program, and our upcoming national conference, which is happening on the 18th of July at the International Community School, and International Educator Summit, which would be happening next year, July. We hope you all can attend. And tonight we have Mr. Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And tonight he's speaking on culture and learning. He is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting. That is a global educational consulting firm that specializes in developing K-12 teachers into identity affirming educators. Mr. Kwame Sarfo, I welcome you to tonight's webinar.
Thank you, Ernestina. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, so let me share. Let me share here. Okay. Ebusuafo, mahuta say.
Yeah, we are doing very well.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, uh-huh. So we are here today. We are going to talk about culture and learning, but I wanted to do a slight remix to make sure we focus more on our most vulnerable learners in our classrooms. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. For this webinar, we want to focus on three things. First, we want to be able to identify systemic barriers that we find within our learning environments that impact our neurodivergent, and just our most vulnerable students. We also want to explore components of what we call an equity-centered learning ecosystem that will focus on all students, even our most vulnerable ones, and depending on time, we'll be able to start talking about how to develop an action plan where we can co-create these learning spaces that will help center student voice, choice, and cultural responsiveness. So those are our focus. Those are our objectives for tonight. So just to give a rundown of what I'll be sharing, of course, I'll start with my story just to provide some grounding for tonight's session. We'll also talk about some systemic barriers and provide some context for how to define our equity-centered ecosystems within our learning spaces. And then, of course, if there's time, we'll start to talk about how we can build an action plan for our own schools. So we've already gone through norms with Ernestina. So all I'll say is for this session, if any questions arise, please feel free to utilize the chat feature. There'll be times during the session where I'll pause to ask any questions or for you all to ask questions that you may have about any of the content that I'm sharing. So please feel free to share your questions in the chat, or if you have a paper or pen that you want to scribe your questions on as a parking lot, you can do that as well. So just to share a little bit about my story. So my journey starts in the United States with my family. So for those who do not know me, my mother and father grew up in the Ashanti region, just outside Kumasi. My mother grew up in Sama, while my father grew up in Mampong. And they were high school sweethearts. They both attended Konongo Odumase High School. So just before Kumasi, for those who don't know. And shortly after high school, they decided to move to the States. So at this time, this is the late 60s, and decided to start a family. And that's how I was born, along with my 3 other siblings. So if you look at the pictures here, you can see here my teacher, Miss Martin, in the first picture on the left. She was actually my special education teacher during my first 3 to 4 grades in primary school. So I'm speaking to you all as someone who had to receive learning support at an early age because I'm neurodivergent and I needed some time to be able to process information. So I was that student who, while I was really smart, I just needed to be in an environment where I would be able to process information and just have time to, get extra support from the teachers and other adults in my school. So I would spend time in a self-contained classroom, and then during certain parts of the school day, I would join the rest of my classmates for different lessons. So I would spend probably half of my time in this self-contained classroom and then another half with the rest of my classmates. So that's how I was navigating my schooling during those early years. And then eventually I would exit out my learning support program. Then probably after 6th grade, I moved to Ghana. So my family sent me to Ghana for 3 years. I promise you, I've always been a good student. It wasn't anything punitive. It was more about me being able to experience my culture more and to be able to be around family. So when I was in Ghana, I actually did Form 1, 2, and 3 during that time. So I did my Form 1 at Engelbert School, which I don't think it exists anymore, but I went there for Form 1. And then Forms 2 and 3, I attended Ridge Church School. So for those who have been to Accra and you know where the Children's Park is, Ridge Church is right across the street from Children's Park. So I actually was there about 30 years ago doing Form 2 and 3 and would end up graduating from there before moving back to the States. So I'll share more about that experience when we get to that place. And then I'd eventually go to school, attend university back in the States, graduate, and then shortly after graduating would start a career in education. So that's just a little bit about my story. As far as my journey as an educator, I started my career as a middle school math teacher. And then eventually I would end up moving abroad to the continent where I've been for the past 6+ years across 3 different countries, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and now in Zambia. And I pretty much help schools transform into identity affirming spaces, depend on their cultural context and their system that they employ with students. So that's what I do now through Identity Talk, as Ernestina mentioned earlier. And another thing that people don't know about me is that outside being a math teacher, I'm also certified to teach students with moderate disabilities from grades 5 through 12. So if it's students who have maybe ADHD, students who are dyslexic, students who have other moderate learning disabilities, I'm certified to teach students who are within that realm. So that's just a little bit about me. So to start us off, I want to start with a question. And I wanted to think about our time in school, whether we're talking primary school, secondary school. If you want to even go into university, that's fine. But I want you to think about your time in school, and in the chat, give me your thoughts about what a healthy learning ecosystem looks like for students. What does that look like? What comes to your mind? A healthy learning ecosystem. Okay, an environment where learners have an equal opportunity to learn, yes. A safe and caring space to explore curiosity and take risk. An environment where learners are open to speak and share their thoughts. Thank you, thank you. So these are some great examples. Oh, hey, Jill. A healthy learning ecosystem should have talk structure routines that support authentic engagement with rich content. a place where learners feel confident to express themselves without fear of mockery or intimidation. So these are all great answers that speak to what we're going to be talking about today. And if more ideas start to come up, please feel free to share those. But I want this to be the basis of what we do
Cute
talk
guy.
about. Oops, let me go back a little bit.
Cute
Yeah.
guy.
Hold on.
Cute
Yes.
guy.
Hey.
Cute
Yes.
guy.
So he got to see you at
Okay. So to start us off, I want us to watch a short clip. So this was a recent interview that Kwame did maybe a few months ago. So if you're living back home, you all should know Kwame. This should not be this should not. So for those who aren't familiar, when you think about rappers, top artists in Ghana, this man is one of the greatest to ever do it on the mic. So he is a big deal back home. But funny enough, for those who don't know Kwame's story, similar to me, he had his struggles in school, and a lot of his struggles in school and the way he navigated his schooling have informed the way that he has even navigated his career as a musician, as a creative, as an entrepreneur. So I want you to watch this clip and just listen to a bit of his early upbringing. And after we watch this clip, I'll ask you all a couple of questions to ground us even further. So I'm going to go ahead and play the clip, and we'll go from there.
as a musician.
He did. He did.
What did you make of your career as a musician? What did he want you to be?
So he was hoping that I'll become an accountant.
Okay, just like him.
Yeah, just like him. But my maths was terrible. Like, I wasn't very academic, and I wasn't very studious, because even though I had a lot of love at home, the education thing wasn't working. So his heart was broken that I couldn't. Just double the giver credit the receiver. You can't do it. Accounting is easy. Why can't you do it? But I couldn't do it.
If you look back, do you think it's because of the dyslexia that you had when you were young?
Oh, completely, 100%.
Did you know it? Did they diagnose you as being
No.
dyslexic?
No, they
when you were
didn't.
young?
They just diagnosed me as dumb.
Who told
What
you
do
you
you
were
mean?
dumb?
My father and the teachers.
Which
The
mean,
teachers. What do you mean?
which means you're stupid.
You are stupid because you can't add 2 plus 2. Everyone can add. Why can't you add?
How young were you when you heard those words? What do you mean?
Oh, maybe it started around 5 when I started going to class 1. So when I went to class 1 at a school in Kumasi called St. Joseph's, there was a woman there called Mrs. Boama, who was my mother's friend. And my father and my mother had gone to tell Mrs. Boama that I grow woman, so it means I play too much.
Play there your eye top.
Exactly. So they should try and help me to be able to learn, because even around 9, 10, I couldn't still say my ABCs.
You couldn't.
No, I couldn't.
9.
So I would say MNOP for MNOP. That's how I heard it. You know, as I couldn't add, I couldn't subtract, I couldn't do long divisions. Now I couldn't do any of that.
Were you being promoted even though you couldn't do all those things?
Yes, because the system just it keeps you
Sweeping you up.
It just keeps sweeping you up, thinking that you will catch on. But it's so I went through school like that, and so if we are like 70 in class, I will come out at 69.
For real.
Or 70.
You were the guy holding the class.
Yes, I was holding
Like Samson.
the whole class. I was the one holding the class. And then sometimes my father would try to teach me, and he didn't have because he used to stammer a lot. So he didn't have the patience in that department, he didn't have the patience to draw it out of me.
What's it like to be like almost at the bottom of the class in terms of what the other students say to you, the teachers, your parents? What was it like?
It is humiliating. It is humiliating, because look at it this way: you go to a Ghanaian school. That's why I didn't let my children go to a Ghanaian school because I didn't want them to experience the same thing. I'm even about to cry. So you go to school in the morning, and then there's dictation. 2 1 spell immediately. I am
The cane.
the cane. Spell
Monday morning
oxymoron.
Mental. Did you do mental?
Yes. And
What was mental like for you?
Charlie, we are the ones in the class. We are saying 2 1. Then the ones who know the answer say 2. So we say 2 2 4.
It's call a response. You call it a response with the
Call
answer.
it. Yes. And so I want you to imagine the fear that either it's dictation or it is mental every morning. And so they came in my head. I can still feel it in my head. You know, and you know, they came you in there. Or where did you go to school?
Yeah, I got it on my hands and
on the hands, on the back, in the head. Papa, it's in the morning. You don't have the time to do because he's beating the whole class, 80 of you. So whichever place is available.
You didn't look forward to going to school on Mondays.
I'm a cute guy.
So he got to see you.
Okay. Wait, Cletus said Monday morning mental drill. I was always beaten. I have my memories too. Hey. But I want you to, so you just heard a short clip from Ochiame Kwame. And if I'm going to be honest, a lot of what he said were things that I experienced as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old attending forms 1, 2, and 3 in Ghana. To this day, it's been 30 years since I've been in that system, and I can still feel the lashes. So you can imagine the amount of trauma that students who have gone through that similar system, still experience as adults. And I only did it for 3 years. Imagine someone that's had to do that from class 1 through JHS, all the way through to SHS, and then eventually you get to university. And this is the norm for you. So we're thinking about culture. So this is culture, right? In Ghana. So for those who aren't living in Ghana or are not familiar with the system, this is the norm. This was the norm back when I was there. And even if you go to a lot of the rural schools, these practices still happen today. So as we're thinking about ecosystems in our schools, I want to pose a couple of questions and get your thoughts on what you just saw. So thinking about Kwame's story, what does it reveal about the ways in which traditional school systems misunderstand students who need learning support or have disabilities? And then my second question is, how might schools look and feel different if we were to design ecosystems that affirm and nurture students like Kwame from the beginning? So I want you to think about those questions, and if you want to open your mic to give some thoughts of what you just saw, please feel free to do so. We are a family, so don't be shy. You could also use the chat as well. So I'll pause to give you all space to process and share, please. No, it's not safe. This is not a safe space for learning, especially if you're doing mental first thing Monday morning. You're tense, you're nervous, you're anxious because there's this level of perfection that's expected from the teacher. The fear, yeah, definitely fear. Any other thoughts? These models come from a colonial model of education as control, not education as liberation. Correct. Very much so. And that's a much deeper conversation that we don't have all the time for tonight. It would feel different if it was okay to make mistakes and take risks. Yes, I feel our culture is not giving space for the lower average students. So all these are different thoughts. All of these. But I remain optimistic because with organizations like Ghana ASCD and many others, we're starting to change the narrative around learning and what that looks like. Yes, I see a hand up from Shine, please.
Yeah, hello, Kwame.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that traditional school system in the past, I'm using in the past for a reason,
Yes.
might not have the understanding of the fact that there are different learners who learn differently. But then the assumption is that all learners learn in a particular way. So there's some kind of a one size fits all understanding of how learners should learn. So in the past, I want to believe that that was the misunderstanding around how learners learn. But then the narrative, I love that you said you were optimistic because the narrative is changing. We are gradually understanding the fact that there are diverse learners. They learn differently. Some of them are tactile, some of them are auditory, kinesthetic, and all that. So if you don't get a child, like, for example, Kwame to do the 2+2. He's singing, he's doing very well. He might be a very good communicator and all that. So the narrative is changing. If you look at the Ghanaian policy currently, we have a no caning policy in Ghana, which is being implemented across schools. So that is one way. And also, if you look at the reviews around the standard-based curriculum currently being implemented, there is a shift and a focus to competency and skills-based training or learning instead of the subject-based sort of learning. So that is just my thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Shine. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because just to give further context, and it may be different now, but I know when I was going to school in Accra, your average class would have about 50 to 60 students. That was the average class. And you'd
And
have the
more.
one, and sometimes more, especially in the rural areas, it'll be more. So if you have 50 students, one teacher, I can remember a classmate who I had in Form 3. She was a good student, always behaved well, studied hard. But when it came to end of term exams, she could never pass. And it would get to a point where she'd be frustrated. And I always wondered, how can someone who studies as hard as her still continue to fail exam after exam? Now, at the time, now, of course, I didn't know what I know now, as an educator. But when I look back at that, she probably had a disability that the teachers weren't able to detect. because the mindset was, Shiadin, like study hard, study harder, right? But sometimes that's not enough. You need more guidance to do that. And I think she was one of those students who could have used that assistance. But thank you all for just sharing some of those thoughts. And as we're thinking about that, I want us to think about what those components are for a learning ecosystem that's going to work for all learners that we come across. But also, how does that look like within our culture in Ghana? Because that's very specific what that ecosystem is. Because there's certain nuances culturally that we have to account for. Especially when we talk about the first part where we're dealing with identity affirming culture and belonging. But we're going to touch on each of these 6 components before we do wrap up. So looking at the first one, identity affirming culture and belonging. So thinking about our schools in Ghana. So, I was in a school where you had Ashanti kids, you had students who were Ga, you had Ewe kids, you had students who were Hausa, just different ethnic groups, and they're speaking different languages. Now, of course, at the time, in our schools, it was basically, English only schools. So, Brafon Kwan. So, like, that was it. You could only speak English. And if you were caught speaking Tree or Ga or whatever your home language was, you get in trouble. So that goes back to what Dr. Jill was saying about that colonial mindset. That's just a small example of what it looked like in school. And I'm sure some of you all who are in the chat today can attest to what I'm saying. Like you couldn't speak Tree, you couldn't speak Ga unless you were in Tree class or Ga class, because those were the 2 main languages you can learn at school at the time that I was there. But outside of those classes, it was just English all day, every day. You couldn't speak anything else. So I think one thing we need to change is, while English is the medium of instruction, we must also acknowledge that our home languages are assets for learning. So there are times where you have to speak Tree or Ga or Ewe, like whatever your language is, in order for students to access curriculum and content. That's something that we should be able to do without consequence. So thinking about that idea of belonging, making students feel welcome, making students feel proud of their culture, we can still have English as a medium of instruction, but we also must uphold that responsibility of preserving our home languages in the process. And that's a conversation that we do need to have more dialogue about. So just identity affirming culture. So everything from language to even the history of where we are from. That's one thing that I could appreciate during my time in Ghana, was that I learned about the history of the country. I was able to learn about, Ose Tutu, Golden Stool, Ya Santewa. I was able to learn about the people who defined our history. Osaja Fall, Kwame Nkrumah, everybody. Like, I learned about them in Form 1, 2, and 3. That was important to me because it gave me cultural grounding. And I think that's something that we need to preserve in our curriculums as well. So really getting back to our identities and ensuring that we stay true to that, even within our curriculum. Another thing too that we want to focus on is access and flexibility in learning design. So I don't want to get too technical, but basically, if we're thinking about different learners in our classrooms, we have to have a different plan of instruction for each of those learners. So for many of us, we're coming from a culture where we all learned the same. There was no deviation. There was no differentiation of how we were taught as students. Your teacher pretty much would dictate notes on the board. They would give you exercise, and then eventually you get exam. And that was the case for everybody. There was no individual learning plans. There was no processes at the time for students who we may suspect have a disability that is impacting their learning. But now that's changing. So if you go to a lot of international schools, and you may see this in local schools as well, there's a more of a focus on different frameworks. So you may have heard of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. Here you have MTSS, which stands for Multi-Tier Systems of Support. So these are basically tiered systems that help us guide the way in which we should be providing academic and behavioral support to students. So it should never be a situation where, for example, if you're in tier 1, where you're providing that initial intervention for students, you're not allowed to say, oh, they don't understand what I'm teaching, so I'm going to just give up on them and just move on to the students who understand, which happens a lot because, as Shine mentioned, we haven't been given the best professional learning when it comes to neurodivergence and special education. At least back then, that wasn't the case. But now there's a lot more information and more awareness around learning differences. So that's now going to inform the way that we go about providing access to different learners. But also, as the teacher, we have to be flexible in how we deliver instruction to students. We can no longer be in a situation where we're using one size fits all models to deliver instruction. We have to be a bit more innovative and creative in how we go about doing that. And that really we could talk about as a whole separate presentation in itself, because there's so many layers to it. But one thing that we do have to shift to in this day and age is providing a framework where we are ensuring that we're addressing learning differences amongst the students who are in our classrooms. So it's making sure we're doing that. Now, student agency and expression. So see how I didn't say voice. I use the word expression because there may be students who don't have the physical ability to verbalize their learning. So just to account for our nonverbal learners, I use the word expression. Because when we're talking about demonstrating learning, there's more ways to demonstrate learning than paper and pencil. Maybe it's in the form of a project. Maybe it's in a form of another type of assessment that allows for students to show what they've learned. But I think it's important that we do provide choice for students and also the autonomy or freedom for students to model their learning in a way that best represents who they are as learners. And when you think about that idea of giving autonomy and choice to students in a culture like the one we know in Ghana that's very teacher centered, that's still something that is a learning curve for a lot of our teachers. Being in a space where they recognize that by giving students autonomy, that doesn't mean that you're losing power. You're just being smart in how you distribute that power to students. But it's a whole mindset that we have to shift in teachers to recognize that when we give students the space to advocate for themselves and to speak up about how they best learn and to be critical thinkers and to not be in a position where we're simply telling them what to study and what to chew and what to pour into an exam. When we're getting to that place where we're not doing that, that's the first step to building student agency, because now we're in a position where we're teaching students how to think for themselves, but also, more importantly, how to think about issues that happen within the country. Whether it's social issues, whether it's political issues, we want to give them the tools to be able to think for themselves, as opposed to telling them, hey, let's look at a past paper, because we're going to study for we're going to study for this exam. We're going to study these questions that will come up on this year's BC, for example, because that's a big one, right? We have to shift away from that culture and think about what's going to allow for students to be the critical thinkers that will give back to the country and allow for the country to progress. So that's the big picture thinking that I think is necessary when we think about student agency. And then as far as what we mean by humanizing pedagogy is basically we want to be teaching students content or subject matter that humanizes who they are. So I mentioned earlier about just being able to have the opportunity to learn Ghanaian history, having the opportunity to learn about Pan-African leaders and figures that helped to bring independence across sub-Saharan Africa, having the ability to read books that speak about our culture and the protagonists within the culture. So I know now when you go to different parts of Accra, there's different places where you can learn that history. There's also a Pan-African library where you can go and get books that are written by other African authors. Those are the type of things that we need if we're talking about preserving culture. We want to be able to do that. So if you look here on the screen, these are just a few examples of books that I believe every educator should read. So you have books by Bell Hooks, All About Love, Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Audre Lorde, Your Silence Will Not Protect You. So these are just a few examples of books that help us to decolonize the way that we approach teaching and learning. And if you haven't had a chance to read any of these books, I strongly recommend you start with one of these. just to help with shifting that thought process. And there are so many more that I can share. But these three are great starters for you all to get on that journey. And then, so real quick, do we have people who currently work at an IB school or are familiar with the IB curriculum model, International Baccalaureate model? So for those who are not, this is basically the learner profile for the IB model. So anybody that works at an IB school, you should be familiar with these different characteristics. So thinking about assessments, rather than looking at numeric scores, right? We want to focus on more competency-based assessments that focus on learner strengths. Because we go back to what I mentioned earlier about the need to build critical thinkers, independent thinkers, and learners. These are the traits that they embody. So we're talking about learners who are principled, learners who are open-minded, learners who are able to communicate effectively, learners who are empathetic and caring, learners who are able to reflect on their learning and take risk in order to grow, and to also be knowledgeable about what they've learned and ask questions through inquiry. So these are just some of the traits that we're trying to build into students. And those are the things that we want them to embody in order to be reflective in what they've learned in class. So that should be also a part of the process that they go through. And then finally, building those community and family partnerships. It's important that we are creating spaces where our parents and families are aware of how students or their children are learning throughout the course of a school year. It shouldn't just be during those parent-teacher conferences when they learn how a student is doing, or when the teacher takes the big piece of paper and posts it up on the classroom wall with the red line letting people know everybody's business of how they performed on exams. Who's at the top of the class, who's at the bottom. And then the parents see that. Like, it shouldn't get to that point. Parents should have an idea of how students are steadily progressing academically, but also behaviorally and social-emotionally. So I think just being in a position where parents understand that they are also partners in this educational experience for students, that's the key. And we have to ensure that we are keeping that front and center in our minds. So I know I went through a lot of content within this hour, but I want to just spend this time wrapping things up before we end this webinar. So to wrap it up, first off, I want to leave you all with a gift. So if you are able to scan this QR code, it's going to give you 60 questions that you can consider as an educator when you're trying to design learning ecosystems that are not only culturally affirming, but support all students, especially those who are most vulnerable. So you can scan that barcode and that should take you to that document. And as you are doing that, I'd like for you all to do this quick reflection. And you can either open your mic or just place your response in the chat. So, of everything that I mentioned, what is one component that you would like to prioritize or address within your school or classroom? If you have more than one, you can share that as well. That's fine. And is there an action that you'll commit to doing within this month to design an ecosystem that is more centered around learning and supporting all learners in your school? So, what ecosystem component do you want to prioritize moving forward? And what is one action that you'll take from this webinar to help you design a more equity-centered ecosystem for all students? So those are my questions for you all as we start to wrap up. All right, thank you, Jill. The 60 questions will be helpful in identifying which of the 6 ecosystem components should be prioritized. All right, thank you. And of course, if you do have any thoughts that do come up, you can feel free to reach out to me. But I do want to just leave you all with this one quote from Bell Hooks, which really speaks to the spirit of what we're talking about tonight. And that is, to teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. So simply put, in order for us to create these equity-centered, culturally affirming ecosystems, it starts with us. We have to create those conditions for learning so that our students feel psychologically safe, so that our students aren't going into a new week of school worried about getting lashed, worried about kneeling down on cobblestone, worried about making a mistake. We have a responsibility to create that psychologically safe space where those thoughts don't even enter their mind. So on that note, I thank you all for your time. This is how you can reach out to me. I think I'm pretty easy to find. So if you go to LinkedIn and type in my name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, you can find me there. You could also find me on Instagram and pretty much anywhere where you have a social media account. You should be able to find me. And I have a new website, a new personal website, which is just kwamesarfomensah.com. So if you want to learn more about my journey and also some of the work that I do for other schools and organizations across the globe, that's the best place you can find my information. And Ghana ASCD, thank you again for inviting me. It's always an honor to be able to present to you all, and look forward to doing it again in the near future. So thank you again. And I do have to step away. So,
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. It was a pleasure to have you today. And if you were not able to scan, do not worry. Do not worry. We would share the link with you along with the recordings, and I would add his social media handles so you can directly contact him, please.
all right. Thank you, Ernestina. Thank you, Dr. Lori. Thank you, Dr. Jill. Thank you, Ghana ACD crew. We'll talk soon. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So our upcoming webinar is on 16th April at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., which we have Mr. Enoch Oye and Mr. Cletus Sangdan. And please register today to be a member and have access to all our professional development trainings at a discounted fee or no fee. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you. And we hope to see you same time next month. Enjoy the rest of your evening, please.